to all of you. Before we start this second part of this second research day, we would like to remind you to turn your microphones off. And if you would like to participate, you can press the hands up button, or now you can leave a comment in the chat. We would like to remind you that this event is being recorded. Okay. First of all, I would like to address Dr. Valeria Sumonte Rojas, Director of the Languages Department of Universidad Católica del Maule, Dr. Lidia Andrea Fuentealba, Director of the English Teaching Training Program at Universidad Católica del Maule, to all the dear presenters, colleagues, and attendees. I feel honored to welcome you to the second part of the second research day of the Department of Languages at Universidad Católica del Maule. This event holds its second version this year, and we're very proud and excited to see all the presentations scheduled for today. To begin with, I would like to introduce the Director of the English Teaching Training Program, Dr. Lidia Andrea Fuentealba, who is going to address the audience. Professor Fuentealba.
Thanks, Bruno. Well, good morning, everyone, students, alumni, teachers, colleagues. I'm very glad to be here with you all today. And well, thanks to Professor Cárdenas for sharing her knowledge with us today. And this is the second time we have the opportunity to exchange scientific knowledge that help us to question ourselves in terms of our pedagogical practices. So I'm very happy that we work together to have this opportunity, not just for us, but for all the community, for teachers, for professors from other universities. And I think that this is a great experience for our students too, because the way in which we address the situations or any problem that we might have in the classroom can be solved or can be addressed through any type of activity or research that we can do. So thanks for being here. Thanks to all the organizers, and let's learn all together today. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Fuentealba. So today, I would like to tell you a little bit about Doctora Mónica Cárdenas Claros. She's originally from Colombia, where she completed undergraduate education in the ELT program at Universidad Surcolombiana. As a Fulbright scholar, she completed her studies at Iowa State University in the United States. She also holds a PhD from the University of Melbourne in Australia. And she's currently a full professor at Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso in Chile, where she's also the research dean for the Instituto de Literatura y Ciencias del Lenguaje. She teaches at the Initial English Teacher Education Program, the Master Program in Applied Linguistics, and the Doctoral Program in Linguistics. Professor Cárdenas Claros is co-author of articles to do with computer-based L2 listening, technology integration in language learning, and blended learning. Her work has been published in top-tier called journals such as Language Learning and Technology, Recall, Computer-Assisted Language Learning, Calico and Technology, Pedagogy and Education, and in language teaching journals such as the ELT Journal and System. She's also co-author of the book Blended Language Program Evaluation and co-author of book chapters published by Routledge, Springer, and Castledown. She has also presented at COL research conferences worldwide. Her research team organizes the International Conference on L2 Listening, which completed its second version last year. Her presentation today is called A Research Agenda to Investigate Computer-Based Listening in EFL Contexts. Welcome, Professor Cárdenas Claros.
Thank you, Bruno. Okay, I'm trying to figure out where do I share my. Sorry, but
there is an arrow at the top.
Yeah. Now I see it. We need to be actually. Yes. Are we okay now?
Yes,
yeah, let me set up the time so that I know how much time I have. And now let's start. Okay, well, first of all, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to be part of the second research day de la Universidad Católica del Maule. So thank you very much for the invitation. When I joined today, I was congratulating the group, the team members that organized this research day. It's not something easy to do, so for real, congratulations for that. Okay, so for today, I will address an agenda for researching computer-based listening and embedded in it, listening in general. So in this address, I will start by defining some key constructs. Then I will discuss what the current situation with listening is in our context. Then I will walk you through 6 research opportunities to research in listening. And then I will finish by inviting you to take that invitation and include it into your own research agendas, right? So, but before that, I will share a little bit about, with you a little bit about my research journey. About 12 years ago, I embarked on, I got a technical problem here, sorry. About 12 years ago, I embarked on the journey of investigating ways in which computer-based listening can be made available and benefit second language listening processes. And in that journey, I started by identifying what triggers second language listeners to click on help options. And then I will explain later what I mean by help options, right? Then I work or I have been investigated input features that affect listening comprehension of second language listening materials. And currently, I am investigating task design features of computers-based second language listening. And what I have learned so far is that we need teachers and researchers to get on board. So there is still a lot to learn. There is a lot to research. And for those researchers out there, novice researchers out there looking for topics, this is a ripe area for to do it. So throughout the talks that I give, I sort of have kind of a moral duty, you know, to persuade you to start investigating and integrating computer-based listening in your language settings. So now that I have, that you know a little bit about my research journey, I need to clarify some key concepts. And for that, I will borrow and expand on Gary's book's analogy of the differences between first language listening with second language listening. Perhaps you have read about it, but just to remind you, he tells us that if we think of language as a window through which we look at what the speaker is saying, in the case of first language listening, the glass is very clean and we see through it without even noticing it is there. But in the case of second language listening, the glass is dirty. We can see clearly through some parts. Other parts are smudged, and yet other parts are so dirty we cannot see through them at all, right? We are very aware of the glass because it gets in the way, right? So now, if we think about the analogy, right? We know that people may approach the dirty window problem in several ways, right? Some would not care about the dirt at all, right? Some others will just use a rag to wipe off the dirt. Others may use home-based solutions such as vinegar and may use newspaper, right? And others may hire a cleaning company, right? So if we extrapolate the extrapolation of that initial analogy to computer-based listening, for which the dirty glass is still there, The same happens to our learners. Learners have a number of options or resources to repair from those breakdowns in understanding when interacting with computer-based listening materials. So that is, they can replay, stop, and pause audio segments. They can read along from transcripts, subtitles, and caption materials. They can access cultural notes, glossaries, and linked dictionaries, and they can receive feedback on their performance. And all of them, if you think about them, that all of them are considered types of enhanced input or help options. And it is precisely the availability of these options what makes computer-based listening, right? So, and why is that so? Because we are using the computer, and a computer here can be, you know, a tablet, an iPod, a mobile phone, right? Not only to play an audio or a video, as we used to do it when we had our tape recorders and audio players. Maybe some of the audience may remember this, right? But we are promoting learner-computer interaction through the provision of that enhanced input. Implicitly, we're also promoting learner control, so it is the learner who actually decides when, if, and how to make use of those features of the programs. The problem, and here is what we have as problematic, right? The problem that we have in our context is that our language learners sometimes do not care about that dirty window, right? Or maybe they may not know about all the resources out there for them, right? Or maybe they don't know, even if they know that there are some resources for them out there, they do not know how to use them, right? And we language teachers, right, although we do all the time things right, we still need to do a little bit more, right? And hopefully I'm not, I hope people are thinking, oh, are not thinking more? Yes, we always can do more, right? Let me give you a bit background and show you some statistics. Well, we know the Chilean context, right? This is what happens in Chile. 54% of the schools, as of 2020, of course, 54% of the schools were semi-private, 9 were private, and 36% were public, right? We also know from experience that in public and semi-private school, classes are normally made up of 35 to 45 students. Teachers are often required to use the text from the Mineduc, and students have between 2 to 4 hours of weekly instruction, right? We also are aware that the Chilean government plans to make Chile a bilingual country by 2030. And for this, among the many other initiatives through the English Open Doors programs, the students about 240,000 students sit every 2 years for the SIMSE test or for the APTIS. And we know that the results on those listening comprehension tests from 2010 to 2010 have been consistently low, right? So, and what tells us is that Chilean learners, as an average, right, are at the A1 level. And we also know in the, according to the Common European Framework of References, and we all know that in that level, or the students are described as students are able to understand simple standard speech, which is very slow and is carefully articulated and can recognize familiar words and very basic phrases. So this is the problem. This is problematic, right? We have done some research with Colombia. We have a similar situation in Colombia. The Ministry of Education has set the expected levels that students must achieve at the end of each school cycle. Yeah, and according to these standards, at the end of high school, Colombian learners are expected to reach B1 level. Once they complete undergraduate work, students should achieve a B2 level, and this regardless of the program of studies. but if they become language teachers, they should demonstrate a C1 level, similar to what happens here in Chile, right? Of course, those are the expectations. But again, according to ICFES, which is the equivalent of, might be the equivalent of CINCE, an analysis of the results from Saber 11 in the years 2017 and 2019, results show that al centrarse en los niveles de desempeño, se evidencia que en todos los años más del 36% de la población se ubica en el nivel 1. Lo anterior da cuenta de que estos estudiantes no tienen la capacidad de comprender. Similar situation with Mexico, similar situation with Vietnam, right? I have given similar talks in this different context and have been doing a little bit of research about what the situation is there. So if you look at those different contexts, but of course, acknowledging that we primarily care about the Chilean problem, right? Because this is where we live right now. These problems lead us to the first research opportunity, right? And there's first research opportunity tell us change the status of listening research, right? Listening research needs to take a center stage in research with a view to inform pedagogical practices. We need to change the status of listening as being the Cinderella skill in research, right? I acknowledge that lots of researchers have taken a keen interest on listening, on researching listening, but when it comes to computer-based listening, the results are quite low. So that's a good opportunity for me, right? But it's bad in the sense that we cannot make that body of knowledge expand, right? Now, so here we have some sources of inspiration to embark on that journey. The first one is the work of Yelham that describes techniques for researching second language listening. Jeremy Cross, provides thorough suggestions on what and how to investigate, for instance, help options in particular. Hubbard is always looking at making the connections between research and practice. Something that I remember that Roberto Ferreira yesterday was asked a lot about during his keynote address yesterday. And that is totally understandable because overall we are teachers, right? But if you look at these three, the first three, they may seem a bit dated because they are all from 2017, right? And I have followed them closely, right? And I have followed their suggestions and I still haven't finished. So they are still a valuable resource for those interested in doing research. And in the last one, I have put a series of questions that still need to be investigated. So I think that if interested in doing research on listening, on computer-based listening, this would be a good starting point for you or for some of you. Now, if we think about, let's go back to the results that I showed you a few minutes back. And what we noticed was a consistent pattern of the different countries. 3 of them were in South and Central America, and 1 of them was in Asia, right? And the consistent pattern that we find here is low results in comprehension measures, right? Well, I agree that those low results can be due to multiple factors. You can say, well, it's a student's lack of motivation. It could be problems with the test, a student's ideologies, lack of resources, overworked teachers. You can think of many possible factors, right? However, in light of the robust empirical research that has been investigating the role of the teacher, and in particular the work of Hattie 2012, right? Teachers are the major players in the educational process. And the real, some would say teachers or class instructors are the real agents of change. I also believe that language education is a shared responsibility. But again, we language teachers have our role to play, right? Unfortunately, that role needs to be better enacted when it comes to listening instruction. And here, this is, I'm trying to give here some thought for reflection, right? Case study research on how listening is taught worldwide consistently shows that, for instance, in Japan, in England, in Taiwan, and in Brazil, listening is still tested, but not taught. That means that listening instruction, I'm not talking about here computer-based listening, I'm talking about listening in general, right? That means that listening instruction lacks attention to the development of strategies and metacognitive awareness of student listening processes. We can say that we can attribute this to the long tradition of teaching listening comprehension or product-oriented, under the umbrella of the product-oriented approach, right? But also because teachers may be unsure of how to teach listening in a principled manner, right? So the above findings are also confirmed in a study with novice teachers that we carried out with my research team. And novice teachers in our study are those who have been part of the school system for less than 5 years upon graduation. So we interviewed 14 language teachers and guided them to reflect on their own teaching practices. And we found that most of them overemphasize a preference for task completion at the neglect of listening strategies and metacognitive awareness. The reasons, you can see them here: lack of time, not knowing how to guide the students to identify problems, and not being sure how to trigger reflections for those problems to be for those problems to be solved. That is, again, we are testing listening, not teaching our students how to listen. This is data, fresh from the oven data that we collected last year. So right here, we have a second research opportunity. We do not know what the situation of listening instruction is in most countries in Latin America. Our study was exploratory in nature. We look at novice teachers only. It can surely lead to the design of a questionnaire where we can see, for instance, if there is a difference between years of experience, school type, different regions in Chile, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a beautiful research opportunity for novice teachers out there. In fact, another related question could be, do we in Chile do computer-based listening instruction? Are the initial teacher education programs preparing pre-service teachers for that? And I kind of know the answer, but of course, it needs to be documented. So this is research opportunity number 2. Now, we know that several materials are added to the internet on a daily basis. For instance, as of by August 2021, there were more than 2 million podcasts and 40 million episodes available around the globe. And these numbers are increasing on a daily basis. The same goes for YouTube channels. And according to overload.com, well, we have 2.3 billion of users worldwide of YouTube channels, right? And 28% of those content is in English. So the availability of the input is no longer a problem, right? These days, we can find authentic, contemporary, culturally rich, and accessible materials that can be highly useful in practical. And these days, learners do not only seek to understand and communicate with the target language speaker, but also to engage with the innumerable materials available on the internet and to become active members of Web2 communities, right? such as YouTube, audio blogs, and podcasts. So with that information, here we have research opportunity number 3. What we know about how teachers select authentic materials for their listening instruction mostly comes from anecdotal evidence, right? But that evidence needs to be systematized, right? And transformed, of course, into frameworks that can be later used by teachers in a principle, not in a reductionist manner, right? So to start your research, you can start by looking at the work of Emory, publishing system, right? Where he looked at university language teachers' beliefs. But again, we still do not know what happens in schools. We do not know if they use complementary material, if they use other materials, if they select materials, or if they just simply stick to the materials that are suggested in the Ministry of Education textbooks or the textbooks provided by the Ministry of Education, right? So we have opportunity number 3. In a study, again, we just completed with my research team, we held focus groups with 68 ninth graders from 2 public and 5 semi-private schools across the Chilean territory. Our purpose was to identify task features of computer-based listening materials as suggested by the listeners themselves. Well, as expected, input came as a key component, right? So here in our analysis, we found that second language listeners wish to be exposed to input tests of high quality. And here we have the results, or I should explain this. We have, these are the names of the schools, these are the number of quotes that appear or that are associated to each school, and these are some sample quotes, right? So what we found is that second language listeners wish to be exposed to input text of high quality, right? And this is mentioned by most of the participants in the different focus groups. They wish to have, they wish to listen to tests that are 2 to 3 minutes in length and text that should be varied. They are a bit, let's say, bored of listening to the same dialogues over and over again, right? Now, they also wanted tests that offer potential for learning. Of course, they like entertaining tests, right? But our students also see listening as an opportunity for learning content. They also saw the importance of audio repetition, that the test should also clearly address their proficiency level, and according to them, special care should be taken with certain speakers' characteristics. So clearly those characteristics, those are the characteristics of the input materials students would like to listen to. But still, we need to look at if those characteristics actually are present in the textbooks that students use as part of the regular classes. Do they match those student preferences? Do teachers have the possibility to look for authentic input, and when they do it, do they follow certain criteria? What dictates that criteria? The experience, the intuition, the availability. So these are questions that would be worth exploring with regards to how teachers, again, select input materials, or they are able to do it, right? Now, we have access to materials, and we may find ways to select appropriate materials, right? The question remains, how can we teachers or researchers guide and help second language listeners to make informed use of those materials? And here we have research opportunity number 4, examine learner control. We need to move, and this will imply having a change in the mindset, right? We need to move away from traditional practices in which we teachers control everything. Different from traditional listening, which is heavily teacher-centered. In computer-based listening, which should give the learner to control, right? But this control needs to be guided and scaffolded. Learners need to be trained first, and this can be done in-class activities, so that potentially that can be transferred, that they can transfer it out in out-of-class activities, right? If we look at YouTube, podcasts, and vodcast materials, for instance, most of them promote learner control through the provision of video control bars, right? So that the learners can replay, pause, rewind text, and maybe change the speed at which the text can be reproduced. So in class, for instance, teachers could start from something as simple as suggesting learners to watch class-related videos, jotting down words they are unable to understand, and see if by playing with the speed button at different speeds, they are able to understand it. Of course, the quality of materials here also plays an important role, right? So, again, in a study that we conducted to see how students made use of learner control, we look at the interaction patterns and related the listening profiles of 11 low proficiency listeners working with 3-minute video-based talks in 6 different sessions. The talks were MIT talks on the topic of technology, and we use a screen capturing software to record students' interactions with video control buttons, and then interview the students to find out reasons why they relied on those buttons, and to reflect on, of course, what makes text difficult to understand, because that was the purpose of that study as well, right? And what we found was we identified 3 patterns of interaction: compulsive users, occasional users, and strategic users. And what we found is that compulsive users click several times audio control buttons. We found that in the listening profile, they primarily like interacting with songs and music videos on a daily basis. And once a month, they would watch something more academic. They pointed to accent and pronunciation as problematic for comprehension. In the case of, in the second pattern that we identified, occasional users use audio control buttons depending on the exercise type, right? Their listening profile shows that they like listening to songs, watching music videos and sitcoms on a daily basis, and they also often relied on subtitles. These listeners displayed using metacognitive processes, as they did not only describe listening difficulties arising from the pronunciation and accent of the speaker, but they also mentioned how the presence of technical and unfamiliar words interfere with comprehension. As for strategic listeners, which is the third pattern, these listeners use the video control buttons as if only if they face a problem with understanding. Their listening profiles show that they did not only have greater exposure to input, but also to richer input. That is, they reporting watching documentaries, news, talk shows, in addition to songs, music videos, sitcoms. Well, after all, you know, they are teenagers or they are young adults, right? So they were able to articulate in more detail what makes text difficult to comprehend, and pointed to pronunciation, accent, speech rate, technical vocabulary. Give me a sec, I have something. Okay, so now if we think about audio video control buttons, it's just one type of help option, right? We have also explored other types of help options, which is precisely what research opportunity number 5 is about, right? Explore textual support. When we did this study, we were thinking about school contexts in which access to technology is limited to a tape recorded and printouts. So in 2018, we observe and compare how high beginner and high intermediate learners of English interacted with transcripts, right? And propose some specific exercises to work with them. These appear in the ELT journal. And we found that teachers' fears that students did in comprehension exercises when they read off from transcripts are just that, fears, right? In fact, students interacted with textual support in the form of transcripts to comprehend text, to recover from misunderstandings, to confirm if what they had understood was right or wrong, right? Well, I must reckon here that some students may go the easy way out and they may use the transcript before listening, right? And that would change the objective of a listening lesson. But for those few students, we cannot deprive others who would like to learn or who would like to advance in listening proficiency. Now, we have also addressed researchers' fears that listening will develop entrenching strategies. Gilham in 2018 tells us, well, the captions is that the danger is that captions could lead viewers to overly rely on them. They could develop entrenched viewing strategies dependent on including use of captions to the extent that they are largely unable to transfer these abilities to settings where captions are unavailable. So based on the vast amount of research on the benefits of using captions for listening comprehension and vocabulary development, and the work of Maribel Montero Perez, Tatiana Sidorenko, and others, Daniela, one of our team members for her undergraduate work, decided not to focus on investigating what type of caption is better, but instead, she designed a whole unit for her high school students in which she was progressively reducing caption support. So again, when we investigate captions, there are about 200. The other day, we were doing a short review of the latest research studies on captions, and there are over 200 studies, and 40 or 50 of them have came out in the last 2 to 3 years. So I don't see the point of keep investigating captions unless we go for ways to reduce that caption support, right? We don't have a definite answer about what type of caption is better for comprehension or for listening or for vocabulary learning. We know that from the studies that we have reviewed is that what we know is that the presence of caption does help comprehension if compared to environments or materials with no captions, right? So again, going back to the study of Daniela, in the first week she showed, so she was not interested in looking at the different types of captions, but how to reduce that caption support. So what she did was a 5-week course. In the first week, she showed the students full captions. For the next week, partial captions, or sentence level captions, and in the third week, keyword captions, and in the last week, no captions at all. And what she found was that there were lots of comprehension gains, of course, that the use of captions allowed them to stay on, the use of captions allowed them to stay on focus, that they improve pronunciation. They also felt that their instructor cared about their learning, and again found that reflection triggering class made them think about how to approach exercises in the future when they came across captions, right? So, of course, the studies that I have showed you, or that I have showed to you, are mostly based on perceptions. But for this to make it out there, we need quantitative studies, right? Telling us whether that caption reduction does contribute to language development. I have to admit it, that we need those quantitative studies, but we need, and we need primarily comparative studies, right? But again, I would insist that we don't need more studies telling us what captions are better, but how can caption support be reduced to the point of absence, right? Well, I can go on and on telling you about evidence that of course needs to be strengthened, but time is quite short. And I would like to finish with research opportunity number 6. Text out empirically based research guidelines to integrate computer-based listening in our classes. Let me go here. So with my team, again, we put together a set of guidelines for teachers planning to introduce computer-based listening into their language classroom. And these are suggested based on a set of identified patterns of interactions of listeners with help options. They appear in the 2021 issue of Language Learning and Technology, and I propose a set of 6 guidelines if you are teaching in face-to-face lessons. So the first one says group help options according to their affordances. Allow limitless opportunities for students to interact with selected options. It's better for teachers not to simply have students work on a single task, but have students work repeatedly, for instance, with captions, or focus, for instance, if you are working on a computer-based listening environment that offers audio control buttons, captions, and let's say cultural notes, have them interact with those particular options in different times, right? And number 3, it says vary not only the types of text, but also the types of exercises and the expected responses. Then encourage individual reflections. What we have learned is that, and this comes from research mostly, because in most research designs, what we have done is to have students interacting in 6 different sessions. And what we have noticed is that by simply asking the students or the participants, why did you use this particular help option? The next time that they get to interact in that learning environment, they think about their answers and they try out new things. So in a way, by asking that why did you use this help option, why didn't you use this help option, we are encouraging them to try out new things to work with that help option. So we need to encourage those reflections as well. Number 5, it says foster small group and whole class reflections. We know that listeners have different interests, or they approach listening text in different ways and in different forms, right? And sometimes students, and this is also that we have found in our research, is that sometimes the students only do, they do not like to get out of their comfort zone, right? So they approach a listening exercise in the same way, but as they listen to their classmates, or as they listen other language learners describe the strategies that they use when approaching a listening exercise, that gives them they think about, maybe I should do this and maybe I should do that. So those group reflections are also very important. And also challenge students to try out new ways to help options. Again, sometimes we need to move students out of their comfort zones, right? They get used to working the same way, but maybe we can push them to try things out differently. For instance, instead of pausing the video every single time they need to listen to, or they need to answer to a comprehension question, maybe we can have them listen to the complete segment or to the complete text at once before answering the questions, or maybe you can have them read the questions before listening to the text, and so on and so forth. We need to push them, we need to challenge them to try out new ways to use help options, right? Now, if you would like to encourage listeners to work autonomously in out-of-class activities, we have 6 other guidelines. The first one says, advise students to interact with vocabulary lists, cultural notes, and pre-listening activities. What we have found is that sometimes, because they transfer the behaviors that from the class behaviors to the computer-based listening environment, what they do is they just go directly to the while listening exercises without doing a proper and previous activation of vocabulary, without checking vocabulary, or without activating a schemata, and so on and so forth. So they transfer that because, again, we have been testing students. We've been challenging them to see how much they are able to understand on the first go, right? Number 2, it says, have students rely on textual support. In this case, textual support refers to transcripts and captions after task completion. What we've seen is that, well, transcripts and captions in general are wonderful help options to help students learn vocabulary, but it's not just for it's just not having them, right, but interacting and doing something with them. Number 3, have students use feedback to their advantage. Again, sometimes the students, because they are, again, so used to being told, yes, it's incorrect, or no, it's not incorrect, they do not go back to the test and understand why their selection was the incorrect one, or why it was the correct one, right? They simply swift to other tasks. They say, okay, yes, I got perfect score, that's it, I'm good, I'm excellent, and then just move on. But interacting with that feedback or repeating the audio itself is a great opportunity for them to develop their listening comprehension. And that relates to guideline number 4 that says, encourage repeated interaction through the use of audio visual control bars and buttons. Repetition is a key instrument or a key step for acquisition, right? And again, students sometimes simply listen to a text once or twice, right? But it is through that repeated listening to the same text several times, by looking at the transcript, by working with these things, how they are going to be able to develop or some of the ways in which they can develop listening comprehension skills. Number 5 and number 6, favor activities that require simultaneous use of transcripts and audio-video control buttons to encourage word segmentation skills development. We know that the way English is pronounced is different from the way it is written, and sometimes students do not see that difference, particularly in high schools, right? So we may use transcripts and textual support in general to make them aware of those features, and also because it helps them remember and determine when a word finishes and a new word starts, and so on and so forth. Number 6 says, promote the use of pause button to encourage students to stop and think about listening processes. Well, sometimes the students need to take that time to digest and to understand that information, right? It is true that sometimes when we interact with native speakers, we cannot have them replay or say the text exactly the same way they said it before, but we also use some interaction and strategies that to make sure that we understand our speaker's message. So this is this can be also done through the use of pause buttons. Well, in some, there are several ways in which listening in general and computer-based listening can be integrated into your own research agendas. I have described and documented six of those research opportunities. Well, my invitation is for you or novice researchers out there to start investigating. Also, I would like to finish by acknowledging the work of my fantastic group of research assistants. As you can see, they are mostly novice researchers with a curiosity and a passion for listening second to none. And well, all the work that I've shown here wouldn't have been possible without their help and their efforts. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. I know it's a lot of information, but it's an overview of research opportunities out there. So there is a lot of thought, food for thought right here.
Thank you so much, Professor Cárdenas, for all the research opportunities. Now we have some minutes for questions from the audience.
Right.
If I may start. Oh,
Yes.
no. I think Andres first, and then Roberto.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. While you were describing all your research and you were talking about the different things that you have done in the past, I thought about me when I was working in the school many years ago, in high school and then pre-K and primary school. And I was thinking about what you stated, that learners need to be trained. I know that learners need to be trained, that we need to identify the different partners of interaction that they have, and we need to somehow teach them how to learn, right? So I was wondering if you can expand a little bit on how you have probably connected everything that you have done with the high school students and also with elementary school students, because there are many teachers here who work in schools, and probably they might be thinking about how to train these learners, how to help them to know themselves so they can reach their goals while listening to any kind of input that they have in the class, because it's not just the video or the song, but it's also the teacher, right? So if you can expand on that a little bit, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. That's a very interesting question, and I kind of knew that I was going to be asked that, right? And if you look at the research that I've done, I started with a keen interest on basic research, as Roberto described it yesterday, right? Understanding, but not with a view to inform pedagogical practices, right? But I remember here at PUCV, one of my colleagues said, well, so yeah, interesting. Yeah, we know that students do not use, for instance, help options, do not use the transcripts. We know that they don't like to use the audio control buttons, or they just listen, or they just go directly to the while listening exercises. So, but what for do we use that? How do we transfer that into the classroom? And then that kind of you know, clicked me, and I said, well, yeah, really. When we do research, sometimes, well, there are different purposes for doing research, right? But that click, and I said, well, yeah, if we need to change, or if we need to make some changes in listening, we need to start thinking about how can we, you know, bridge that gap between what research tells us and what happens in the actual classroom. So if you notice, the guidelines that I read or that I explained and that refer to research opportunity number 6 are kind of thought for teachers who have never, ever, right, used computer-based listening. And they are telling the teachers, for instance, well, group options, right? Instead of having the student go to the YouTube channel and have the students interact, because here we're talking about high school students, right? And high school students have access to the internet. They access it on a daily basis. They know how to work with it much more than us, right? But they have never been guided, for instance, how to use that speed button, right? So, for instance, that could be one way forward, one way forward, right? Looking at the, first of all, the different options that are offered in a website, identifying them, right? They have audio control bars, they have a speed button, they may have captions, they may have cultural notes, they may have the visual support, right? So instead of having them, students just go and listen, tell them, okay, I would like you to do this exercise, or maybe guide them or model that in class. And first of all, I would like you to, let's see, listen without playing, without looking at without reading the captions, right? Turning off the captions, right? Playing with it. Then I want you to listen to it again with the captions on, right? See how many words you can identify here. Or maybe just with the sound off, just by looking at the visuals, and so on and so forth. So the first thing would be identify the options out there, then focus on particular options, and that will also depend on your listening goals, right? If your goal is for the students to understand the message, right? The message can be understood in different ways. Just by looking at the images, right? They can understand the message. Maybe having them predict by looking at the images only, and then confirm with what they are listening actually is reflected through the images, and so on and so forth. So there are different ways, right? And then have them reflect on if that worked, if they like it, or if they didn't like it, or maybe what other ways they could use that particular help option, and share this in class. So it's kind of those 5 steps will be kind of the basic ones for you to start. And of course, you can change those steps as you change or the focus on the different help options, right? But my suggestion is not to try to focus on everything, but go one by one. First, we work with audio control buttons, then with images, then with captions, then with this, then with that, and then have them make use of all of them, right? That would be one of my suggestions.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, research-based teaching is something that we should do in our classes, and it will be very interesting to try out all those suggestions that you said for a long period of time, just to see how it works and how much students can really be trained to be autonomous. So thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Roberto, please.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. Thank you very much, Monica, for the wonderful talk. I actually really enjoyed it because it was very useful and confirmed many of my beliefs about language learning, because when we don't understand, then we struggle, and then we find different ways of understanding listening. And I remember when I was in uni, my first week, and didn't understand anything. And there were actually no exercises to make listening possible. It was just testing, as you said. So you had no option, but next week you had a test and you didn't know how to prepare, and then you were scared. And I failed many of the first quizzes, and it was awful. And so I think it's really your research is very relevant in the sense that I hadn't actually heard much about listening, exercises, but listening prepare students for listening, not just testing. So that I think that was very interesting. Then I have a number of small questions, and maybe you can just comment on all of them at the same time. One was the preferences that students have. I think the preferences are quite intuitive. They match my preferences, and I wanted to know whether they also match the science, because I'm not sure whether you just talked about the preferences, but do they actually work? That's the question about the preferences. Maybe I missed the information.
You mean the input preferences?
Yes, the student has some preferences about listening. So, for example, they wanted
input.
Length was just 3 minutes, for example, not very long. Let's say text. That they wanted everyday language. They didn't want artificial dialogues, for example. And I remember I was bored of that, and I also prefer everyday language. So if you can comment a little bit about the science behind that. Then regarding captions, I also thought it was. I think there's a lot of research on captions, but how to get rid of captions, or what conditions regarding captions are better. So and so I like that a lot. And what would you advise for beginners? Because I think that's when we have most of the problems, when we are facing for example, a YouTube video, which is authentic material, but when we are beginners, it's really hard to understand a YouTube video just from the start. So
there is
the last thing is the school settings, because all those things I'm pretty sure they work, and I believe you. And the main problem in Latin America, I think, is the school settings, because you also mentioned that there were 35, 45 students, and so if discipline, for example, doesn't work, or there are too many students in the classroom, then none of these things are actually very good. Can't work in the end because of the school environment, let's say.
Okay.
That's
Let's see. I think we have 2 minutes, right? Because I remember you told me that we have like the next presenter starts at 11:10. Regarding preferences, we still do not have a definite answer. Of course, we know that if we address the students' preferences from the theory of engagement, it's more likely that students who engage in texts that they are actually interested in learning about are more likely to comprehend them and to improve their listening comprehension. That's something that has been researched, and we have that. Regarding length, well, it's not, we have, I don't think I have come across research that tell us about the length of what would be the ideal length of text, because it all depends on the objectives, right? The type of learners that you have, and the genre. Sometimes talks, if you just simply extract a segment from a talk, you will get rid of important discursive features, right? And those discursive features will help you. Like the structure of how the discourse is structured, that's gonna be helpful for you to for you to understand it, for the listener to understand it. So you have to be very careful on how you actually select the materials and how you select the parts so that you don't miss important information, because that's something that we also sometimes happen to do poorly. We just simply say, okay, I'm interested in just this segment, but by cutting off or by cropping that video, we are just leaving behind important information that is necessary for comprehension, right? Now, about captions, you mentioned that you like the research, but what would you advise for? What would I advise for beginners? The study that I briefly described was with high school students from a semi-private school, and they were all considered high beginners, right? And what we did with them for that reduction, and again, we were just looking at perceptions. We were not looking at learning or listening comprehension gains or vocabulary learning gains, but and of course the unit that we prepared was carefully crafted. So all the text or the segments that we did or that we selected corresponded or aligned to the topic of teenage matters, right? So in a way, the vocabulary was recycled. In a way, the same topic was described in different media, like cartoons, like movies, and so on and so forth. So that's what we did. And what we did was we started with full captions, right? Then we moved to sentence level caption, then with keyword caption, and then no captions at all, right? We did not take comprehension measures. We would love if you or your other researchers would be interested in like using the materials that we have used to see, and if we can do a pre-test and post-test of listening comprehension to see if we have some comprehension gains. That would be wonderful to do, but that would be the methodology that I would advise to working with low proficiency listeners. And the last question I don't remember, Roberto, I'm sorry, and I think we are out of time.
Yes, I mean, the school environment. Is that I think
the
one of the most problematic things.
That's something that, yeah, we teachers complain a lot about, but we cannot do much about it, right? So we need to find ways to work with that. And with technology, what we found, for instance, in our data is that when teachers start to give control to the learner, and giving control to the learner is something as simple as, for instance, instead of having the students sit for a listening test without knowing what they are going to be asked about, the teachers, for instance, what they did was that they share the actual audio segment with the students 2 days before, right? So students actually reported that they would not all the students, of course, not all the students would do something like that, but most of the students transcribed the test. They looked for words, they interacted with the test several times before the actual test. So in my opinion, that's much more worthy, right, to give the students to study, to work with that test, than just having them sit for the test and then mark them right or wrong. So that could be something that I can think of right now. And I think I'm way over time, and I apologize for that, but it's Roberto's fault.
Sorry. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I think we need to move on. I would like to apologize to Professor Ranjiva. If you could write your question in the chat box, probably Dr. Cardenas-Claros could answer the question in the chat. Thank you so much again for your presentation and all the research opportunities you gave us to all of the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation again.
Alrighty. Our next speaker is Professor Ubajkova, who has been working as an EFL teacher since 2011. She has a master's degree of teaching, and she finished her second degree in English and American Studies in combination with Hispanic Studies in June 2018. She's currently teaching at the Faculty of Education at the Catholic University of Maule in Chile. She has taught English at various institutions in Ecuador, Universidad Técnica Particular de Loja, U.S. Embassy, Centro Ecuatoriano Norteamericano, Global Quality English, Canadian House Centers, and also in the Czech Republic. Apart from business English classes and Cambridge exams preparation, she has experience with teaching English online. Her research area is error analysis. I would like to welcome her to present Errors in Expressing the Past in Advanced Chilean EFL Learners with Spanish as L1. Professor Ubajkova, whenever you want.
Now you can hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you see the presentation?
Mm-hmm. Loud and clear.
I'm going to do what I always tell my students to do. I'm going to time myself. Super. So dear Professor Ramirez, thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning. Dear colleagues, pre and in-service teachers, educators, and researchers, thank you very much for joining me today. As you can see here on your screens, I'll be talking about errors in speaking about past events in advanced Chilean EFL learners. So while Professor Cardenas Claros talked about listening, I'm going to focus on speaking. Feel free to ask any questions. There'll be 10 minutes dedicated to them at the end of my presentations, as we already mentioned. Before I start, I'd like to mention that I focus on errors because I believe that instead of demonizing them, we should embrace them, accept them as a part of the learning process, analyze them, and find possible ways to present them. So the structure of my presentation is the following. I'm going to start with the introduction. I'll talk briefly about objectives and research questions. Then I'm going to describe the instruments, the method, and obviously the data analysis. And then I'm going to get to the part of results. And I'll offer some conclusion at the end. And as I have already mentioned, 10 minutes are going to be dedicated to questions at the end. So before we immerse ourselves in error analysis, I'd like to look at the distinction between errors and mistakes. So as you can see here, an error is the use of a linguistic item in a way which a fluent or native speaker would regard as faulty or incomplete. While mistakes are unsystematic, for example, due to memory lapses, physical states like tiredness, etc., or psychological conditions, errors are systematic and they correspond to the underlying knowledge of the language. So a mistake can be self-corrected while an error cannot, according to Brown 2000. Okay. Let me just say something at the beginning. The importance of learning English will not be discussed. We all know how important it is to learn English. What will be discussed, however, is learning and achieving a good command of English. As we are educating future teachers, we must aim at accuracy. Speaking of accuracy, advanced Chilean EFL learners are prone to making errors in various areas. Sorry about that. But especially when speaking about past events. Therefore, I decided to focus my research on this particular area. The research and its result will help me to identify the cause of these errors and address these shortcomings. Thus, I carried out a contrastive interlanguage analysis of advanced Chilean EFL learners with Spanish L1, which uncovers a wide range of features distinctive of learner language. Let's move to the objectives. Give me 1 second. Okay. So the general objective of my study is to analyze the errors made by Chilean advanced EFL learners in speaking about past events, and the specific objectives are to identify, classify, explain, and evaluate these errors, and then to compare these types of errors Chilean L1 speakers and native speakers of other languages make when they speak about past events. The next point are the research questions. So question number 1 is, what kind of errors do advanced Chilean EFL learners make when they speak about past events? And question number 2 is, are there any differences between the types of errors Chilean and other L1 speakers make when they speak about past events? Firstly, I'd like to shed light on the method selected. But let me first thank all the second-year students, some of them are here, from the admission year 2018, 2019, and 2020. There was just one student from the year 2021 who participated in the research. And I would also like to thank all my assistants, Maria Torres, Catalina Hole, Lucas Bustos, Veronica Rojas, Sofia Zapata, and Daniela Canales for helping me carry out the interviews. Obviously, I wouldn't be able to do this by myself. Together, we created a corpus of 62 students. 24 students were from the admission year 2018, 32 students were from the admission year 2019, 5 students from the admission year 2020, and then we had 1 student from the year 2021. It might seem different, however, all the interviews were recorded and transcribed at the same particular moment during the preparation for the FC exam. So the students were supposed to have the same level, B2. So out of 62 participants, we had 38 female and 24 male. Students aged from 19 to 25. So secondly, there is a background which is necessary to consider. Future English teachers at UCM study and practice grammar, special English tenses and aspects from the first semester in a plethora of courses. For example, and I'm sorry that I haven't translated this part, gramática contextualizada 1 y 2, morfosintaxis 1 y 2, competencias comunicativas en inglés de 1 a 4, EFC taller. At the end of the second year, all students are required to take the FC exam, which means that they should be on the upper intermediate level. So let's turn to the next slide and talk about the instruments, material, and apparatus. So the first step was to create the corpus by collecting a sample of learner language. To collect this sample, the students were asked to attend an interview, which was recorded and transcribed by them. The interview was divided into 2 parts, as you can see here. In the first part, they chose one topic and they just talked about the topic of their choice. And then in the second part, they described a set of pictures. In the first part, the interviewer encouraged them to use past tenses and aspects by asking them different questions. And in the second part, while they were describing the 2 pictures, the interviewer asked them questions in present and future tenses and aspects. On the next slide, you can see the volume of recorded and transcribed data. So those of you who saw it last year, this is the new part. Sorry about that, because you might have seen the first part 2 times. So here you can see that 26 students decided to talk about their some kind of significant life experience. 20 students talk about their favorite movie or book, and 16 students spoke about some travel experience they had. I would like you to focus only on the number 617 because the B turns are only the utterances made by the interviewee. Yeah, we are counting just that. So per student, we had approximately, or each student said approximately 617 words. So you can imagine how long it was approximately. In minutes, that would take approximately 5 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes. Before we get to the data analysis and results, I included a short definition of tagging for you, according to James 2013. Tagging means assigning part of speech labels to structures in the corpus. For my own research, I used 3 different tags. EGVT for error grammar verb tense, CGVT for correct grammar verb tense, and then the $ for emendation. The tags were taken and adapted from the list of tags created by Gilova in 2014. Here you can see the subgroups of the references to the past analyzed in the corpus. Present simple and continuous, present past perfect, past simple and continuous conditionals, also non-finite verb forms. I'm going to mention why in a second, so just wait for that. And then modals with perfect infinitive. Okie dokie. So now we get to the part of results. So this pivot table shows the total number of errors. So please focus on this number. We found 260 errors out of 1,470 total past references used. The mean number of errors per speaker was 4, so approximately 4 mistakes per 1 person. In the next table, 1 second, yeah, okay. So in the next table, you can see erroneously used tenses. There are a lot of numbers, I know. So just focus on one number. Yeah, focus on one number. This is a very significant number, 193, because the present simple was erroneously used, yeah, in 193 instances. So instead of the past simple, the students used present simple. Okay, and the last part of my presentation will offer you some examples and conclusion. So let's look at the examples first. I included two different examples for you, one without tagging, as you can see here, and the second one is with tagging, so that you can imagine the work I had to do before I got to the point of gathering the results. So here is what the student said, and this is what he or she was supposed to say. So instead of I planned, he or she was supposed to say planted. And as I said, so the students used present simple in 193 instances out of 260, so that you see that that's a very significant number. Let's look at erroneously used present and past perfect. I would like to point out something here, so let's read the example. Sorry about that, something going on the outside. I have never traveled. I have never traveled. So focus on this part. The past participle form is incorrectly used. And the same case in the past perfect. If you look at the past perfect, sorry about that. I'll wait a second, then I'm going to continue. You can probably hear it. There is some noise outside. So instead of we had to pay, we had paid. Yeah? So mostly the students made an error when it came to past participles. Let's look at erroneously used past simple and continuous. So for example, here, the student was supposed to say realizes instead of realized. And then in the second case, in the case of past continuous, you can see that the student made a mistake here in the use of in the present participle. Sorry about that. Sorry. Okay, dokie. So to conclude, the most problematic area is the use of simple past tense. So I found 195 errors out of 260. To conclude, the most problematic area is the use of simple past tense. If we compare, for example, Czech and German speakers, the inability to supply aspects appropriately can be explained by the lack of this category in the L1, as the tense systems are very different. Although Spanish tense system is not so different from the English tense system, so we cannot use the same explanation. In the case of Spanish native speakers and Chilean native speakers, whose L1 is Spanish as well, I detected that they use present simple instead of past simple, which is striking, as their expected level of proficiency is B2. And on the next slide, I would like you to focus on this part. Here you can see which tenses and aspects are expected to be mastered according to Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. I'm not going to read them. I'm sure that you can imagine. Most of them they are supposed to know at this level. They are supposed to master them. There are several possible explanations for these errors. It can be wrong understanding or incorrect automatization of the rules introduced by teaching, or insufficient understanding of past references, or simply a natural L1 transfer. Before my final conclusion, I would like to emphasize that almost 50% of the time, the students were using the verb be. Obviously, there is a certain necessity to use the verb be often because it has many different functions. For instance, it's an auxiliary verb, etc., etc. However, it has been overused, and I'm going to show you in these examples. I think I stopped sharing or no? Sorry about that. No? Am I still sharing? I have a technical difficulty here. Sorry about that. I'm not sharing, am I?
Yeah. No, you're not.
I'm sorry, I clicked on something and I got out, but I'm almost done.
That's all right.
Sorry about that. This is not very professional. I am a disaster this morning, sorry about that. I'm going to go back right away.
Now you're sharing, Sharka.
Sorry about that.
Mhm.
I have no idea what I clicked on. I was just trying to see the number and then I just, okay, okie dokie, I'm almost done. So what I want to show you here is that in 50%, almost 50, 46.4% of the time, the students were using the verb be. Yeah, 562 instances out of 1,210. I'm going to show you the examples. I'm only going to read the part with the verb be. So imagine that the student is talking. It was to Chiloé, but I was like 10 years old and it was not good because, well, it was a good travel, but when we were returning, so you see, obviously in the last case, it's necessary, but you can see that it was not necessary in all the previous cases. I don't know, maybe we can discuss it once we get to the part of questions and comments. So here you see the number of the instances when the verb be was used, and then here, in the case of the verb have, I haven't found any irregularities. I would like to mention that there were only 7 speakers out of 62 who did not make any errors. Only 7. Okay. And as a part of my conclusion, secondly, the students are not using almost any complex structures. And as for reported speech, for instance, you can notice that the students simply switch into direct speech instead. Yeah, so here you see it in the example. I said, well, I can pay you the monthly subscription and I can go. And thirdly, students mix and confuse tenses and aspects and pay no attention to the correct use of simultaneity, successiveness, and anteriority. I'm almost done, bear with me, 1 or 2 more minutes. To conclude, I strongly advocate that we should reconsider our approach and target these error-prone areas in the teaching process. As teachers, we should emphasize discourse and communication skills. We should also highlight the difference between informal and formal English and spoken and written English. We also ought to focus on accuracy and variety, especially in the case of the students of English pedagogy. And lastly, the recording and transcribing should provide or could provide the students with opportunities for self and peer evaluation. Also, if we compare English and Spanish at times, we might avoid transfer. At the very end, I'm going to mention that I'd like to use the corpus for further research with the minor students. And just one very last thing, I've got a gift for you today, which I'm going to share via chat after, once I finish my presentation. As a result of this study, I started focusing on different past forms, past simple forms, past participle forms in my classes much more. I will share the presentation with you as you might consider using it, or maybe at least some parts of it. The presentation has been done for level B2, so you might need to adjust the level. It is mostly based on Murphy's classification on the past form, so obviously it is quite simplified, but it could be helpful. So thank you very much for your attention. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Here is the list of references. Now we have 10 minutes for questions and discussion. I'm very interested to hear all your comments and questions. I think I've finished on time.
Yes, you did, Sharka.
So
You're good. Antonita Magalla has a question for you.
Sure.
Antonita, please.
Yes. Hello. I'm not sure if you mentioned that, but were these students tested somehow, maybe with a sample test, or they already sat the FC when you no?
I mentioned it, but I can mention it one more time. They were preparing for the FC, and this interview was very spontaneous. That was the most important to be able to gather the data. I wanted them to speak spontaneously. So at the beginning, we gave them a choice of different topics. So they look at the topics and then they talked approximately 2.5 minutes about the topic. And then they got 2 pictures always the same pictures for every single student, and then they had to describe what they saw. But they were about to take the FC exam, and I don't know, they would take it maybe 1 or 2 months after the interview was recorded. So they were supposed to be on the level.
Yeah, they
were supposed to be on YouTube. Wow.
But we know that sometimes the reality is very different.
That's what I wanted to prove, that the reality is different.
Have you ever thought to do this kind of research among teachers? That would be interesting.
That would be interesting. Thank you very much. I could do that. I love the idea.
Yeah, because it's different when we are already on training like every day with our language. And I'm sure, in my case, personally speaking, I'm still making mistakes with the past events. So maybe it would be a good idea. So
thank you very much, Antonio.
Thank you for your presentation. Very nice, very interesting.
Antonio, you've been working as a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it the high school or?
Currently, I'm working in high school and at the university.
Maybe just as a piece of advice, think because also like the process when we did that, when we were recording and then transcribing, and once the students saw the transcription, it was mind-blowing for them. Some of them actually told me it was mind-blowing, and I told them, okay, count how many likes you say. Like all the time. And we counted on sometimes 50 in one of the transcript, or then we looked at some other features, etc. So it was very interesting, because the students never listened to themselves.
Yeah.
So that would also be part of the listening.
Sometimes we are kind of terrified to listen ourselves and to realize how many errors.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. That's why I said we are not supposed to be afraid of it.
Yeah, we are not supposed, as usual.
Thank you very much, Antonio.
Jarka, you have a question in the chat box, and also a question by Roberto. You choose.
Maybe we start with Roberto and then I answer the one.
Okay. Roberto?
Hello, Sharka. Thank you for your talk. Very interesting as well, the use of present simple instead of past simple. So I have a couple of comments. Do you think that maybe the context influence the use of present simple? Because sometimes we can talk about the past, but still use present simple. And given that the students probably know present simple better than past simple, then they thought they could use present simple. That might be one of the explanations. Another would be that they don't really know past simple at a productive level, and they only know it at a receptive level. And so they can understand it, they know that it's correct, they know how to use it, how to recognize it, but maybe they don't know how to use it properly or in a fluent conversation. So I think that would be my, what do you think about those two things?
How the context influences.
And the other one, sorry, is that they maybe sometimes they just drop the end of the word, because we use that in Spanish a lot, and sometimes the last part of the word is sounds very soft, and that might apply to some verbs.
Absolutely. I'm going to start with the last one, Roberto, if you don't mind, and I'll go backwards. As you say, the dropping of the ending ed, that's very common, and that's why I tell them you have to pronounce well, because you are teachers. I'm talking about future teachers here. Some, they are about to be they are about to be English teachers, and they can't speak like that. Because they don't, I don't know if you've noticed this, probably, when you teach your own students, they do not see the difference between informal and formal English. They speak informally at all times. And we cannot do that, Roberto, because we need to underline this difference. So when I am in my classes, I actually tell them, did you say the ending ed or no? Because I didn't hear it. I tell them openly. My students, I ask them, I question it in the class, and I tell them, okay, I didn't hear the ed, so for me, it's not there, it's a mistake or an error. You know what I mean? And it can be a mistake. It can be an error, in both of them, it depends. And As you say, obviously, we can use present simple to describe past event. We can do that, but Roberto, not in the instances. If you want, I would go. I don't want to go too deep, but if you look at the entire, let's say, part of that speech, they mix the tenses. So they have no idea because they would have to use historic present and they are not using historic present. They are just simply mixing. They say one word in past, one word in or one verb in present and then past and then present. And that means that it's incorrect.
Yeah.
That's why. Have I forgotten to answer any?
I think that's it. No,
okay.
maybe no, yeah, I think you answer everything. There are other small things that maybe we can discuss later because
absolutely. I just think that it can sometimes be simply that it's easier for them simply to use the present simple because they don't have to think about the past form.
But do you think they actually know the verb tense they need to use?
They
just
must
don't
know
want
it,
to
Roberto.
use
No,
it.
they must know it. It's 100%, almost 100%. I can do another research on that if you want. But
so
I'm sure.
Don't understand instructions, or they are lazy. They don't want to make the effort. I suspect it's a little bit more difficult for them to use past tense than simple than present tense. So maybe they just relax and say, "Oh, it's fine. I can get around with."
But that also explains, that also explains why we have so many students who actually do not pass the FC at the end, because they do not have the level simply. And that's why we did this exercise as a part of the FC workshop, because I wanted to show them you need to speak differently. If you start speaking formally, if you pay attention to what you are saying and how you are saying it, then you are going to pass the exam. If not, then you are going to fail, obviously. I am going to look. Sorry, Roberto. Thank you so much. We can discuss it further. Sure. There were some questions in the chat. I don't know if you have time for that or not. I can answer them via chat.
Sharka, we have about 2 minutes and you have 2 questions in the chat box.
So maybe I'm going to answer them via chat, just not to take too much time, so that you have time for the next speaker.
Thank you so much for your comprehension, your understanding, as is usual. Thank you very much for your presentation again. So moving on, our next presenter is an English teacher from the University of Santiago and a master's in applied linguistics for English language teaching from the University of York. She has been teaching adults for 10 years at different higher education institutions such as Instituto Chileno Británico de Cultura, DUOC UC, and recently at Alberto Hurtado University, where she is currently part of the ESP program. Her research interests are learners' linguistics difficulties and L1 interference and teaching strategies to address them. I would like to invite her to present the effect of audiovisual input on the categorical perception of English phonemes B and V by Spanish learners. Miss María José González, whenever you want.
Hello, thank you for the welcome.
Hello.
I am gonna start present in a second. And thank you for the opportunity as well to present here. Has it? Yes, it is uploading now.
Now we can see your presentation.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Okay, hello everyone again, and thank you for this opportunity. As you were saying, the name of my presentation is the effect of explicit audiovisual input on the categorical perception of English B and V by Spanish L1 learners of English. So as EFL teachers, we face a number of challenges when training our students in all 4 skills. However, listening is commonly described as the most difficult skill by learners. And the little exposure that our students have in our context makes it an overwhelming task to conduct in real life. So I would like you to think about your own experience. We're going to answer a question. So if you can, with your phone, you can scan this code, or I'm going to share a link with you by the chat so you can answer this question with your experience. So just a moment. So if you are accessing now the code, you can start answering the question. Please choose two options. Sorry, I can't see the chat here. Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen so you can see the answers to this question.
Would you like me to share the link in the chat?
Yes, please. Thank you. So I am going to share now. My screen with you in a second, because I can't see it, sorry. Okay, so here's the question. Which of these difficulties have you most frequently encountered as a student or observed as a teacher? And we can see most people have said difficulty in discriminating words that sound very similar in the target language. As I'm trying to zoom it here, okay? For example, cup or cap, or best or vest, right? And we also have difficulty in comprehending the idea of a sentence because of not understanding every word, right? So this is what you recognize in your experience, either as students or as teachers, difficulties. And we wonder then, what is it that makes listening so difficult, and also what we can do, right, to help our students. So let's take a look at what the literature says. I'm coming back now to my PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you. So if we talk about listening, we know that it considers lower level listening and higher level listening, okay? And in lower level listening, basically what we do is we detect the acoustic signal, and we identify phonemes, and we group them in words. So I think you can see my slide now, right?
Yes.
To make up words, right? And then higher level listening is when we interpret those words to a mental representation, and then we can analyze them syntactically or pragmatically. Now, what is the main cause of breakdowns is perception, which is in lower level listening, and it's not really paid much attention in the classroom. So let's take, for example, the phrase, he was wearing a biking suit, which will generate this. But if you mistake the sound b by v, or if you can't really tell the difference, a completely different image would be represented in your mind, and then all the rest of the message would be wrongly understood until you as a listener realize that something was odd, and therefore the communication crashes. So in this case, this is what we call breakdowns, and they are mainly realized at the level of perception, and they prevent our learners to access the higher level, so then interpret the complete text, for example. Now, categorical perception is this identification of phonemes, and it is defined as the ability of humans to focus on distinctive acoustic features of speech and to ignore irrelevant differences. This is acquired unthinkingly before the first year of life. And this is when babies learn to identify cues which are relevant for communication, such as certain phonemes in their mother tongue, and to dismiss information that is not relevant to decode the message, such as voice variation, inflection, and things like that. So we end up with a set of categories in our mind by which we classify the acoustic signal, and this is done automatically. So we can illustrate this with visual perception exercise. I'm going to show you a color. So look at this color in the circle. And now if I told you you have to classify this, but I give you the options red or blue, which one would you choose? If you look at your window on Teams, you will see a section that has like a hand, so you can react now. Please show me a heart if you think this will be classified as red, and please show me your thumbs up if you think this would be classified as blue. Okay, so I can see some hearts, right? Lots of hearts. Feel very loved right now. Now, what happens if we include the category pink? Will your answer change? Can you please answer again what you think the category is now? So what this shows us, we can see lots of laughs or smiley faces. What we can see here is that we can only classify something in a category if we acknowledge its existence, right? So if we're not aware of the differences, probably what we will do is to categorize something or the element as the nearest category that we know, and this is called the perceptual magnet effect. This is very well known with the case of Japanese learners of English. So we know that they tend to have a difficulty with the sounds and r in English because they assimilate both sounds. They are equally similar to their native variation r, right? So they have this difficulty. In the case of Spanish L1 learners of English, well, we do have several differences, but we can predict by analyzing both languages a difficulty distinguishing the voiced bilabial plosive b and the voiced labiodental fricative v, since these two sounds are allophones in Spanish, but they are not in English. So again, the Viking issue. Now, whether this categorical perception thing is approachable from a pedagogical perspective is still under investigation. However, we do know that this issue is mainly attributed to a cognitive process than a sensory process. So you can actually perceive the difference, but your process makes the automatic decision that it is irrelevant. Okay, so for this study, what we want to know is whether this form-focused instruction, which is any planned or incidental instructional activity that is intended to induce language learners to pay attention to linguistic form, will this have any effect on their perception? Basically, what this means is that we make students notice some linguistic aspect, and we want to know whether this will have an effect. So our research questions were, does explicit audiovisual input of phonemic contrast have an effect on the categorical perception of English B and V by Spanish L1 learners of English? And second question, are the effects of the explicit audiovisual input, if any, retained over time? So this was designed as an experiment, actually, and what we included here was a pre-test to assess if the difficulty was present, in the predicted difficulty was present, a treatment based on this form-focused instruction to make them notice this difference, and a post-test, which was actually two, an immediate post-test and a delayed post-test to see if the effect was retained over time. So there were 36 participants in this study, and they were all adults who had learned English as adults, so no after, let's say, the critical period, and they were living in York, England. They were randomly allocated to two groups. So we had the experimental group and the control group. In the experimental group, they were exposed to the form focus instruction explicitly, and in the control group, they were taught implicitly the same idea. And then we had the post-test to assess the effect and the duration if there was an effect. So this was the basic design of the experiment, and now to the instrument. Regarding the instruments, all three tests administered, the pre-test, the immediate and the delayed post-test, were forced choice tasks, which means that the participants had to decide between two options. So I'm going to show you how this was designed. We had to listen to a pair of words, which were minimal pairs, and they had to decide if they were listening to the same word or a different word. So they were not seeing, as you can see in the image, they were not seeing the difference, the different words. They would only look at the words same and different and listen to, for example, vest, best, or best, 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 test, different pairs of words, and they would only have to decide if they were listening to the same word twice or different words. So we predict that they would have a difficulty making the difference with the experimental category, which is the one with V and B. And we also put the control repeated one, so to assess whether they could actually tell the difference, because if you put the participants with the bottom same or different, they will expect that at some point they will be different, even if they are not, right? So you have to put both groups. So this is what the tests look like. And then the treatment. Well, the treatment was a 20-minute video. Both of them were 20 minutes. Now, the difference was that one was the experimental group was conducted explicitly, so they were told directly that this difference exists, and in the one that was implicit, they were just showed the difference by examples, but they were not explained this. So basically the treatment was a video with the format kind of a class with a form focused instruction. So we had for the explicit input, we had the target sounds explanation, focus on articulation, and also some guided practice. Now, let's take a look at the results of the experiment. So this experiment was analyzed in different levels. First of all, we analyzed the pre-test, and it showed that there was a significant difference in the perception of the target phoneme. So what we predicted would happen actually did. So participants didn't really have any problems making the difference between best and test, but they did make mistakes with the categories with B and V, both for the control, like repeated, and also for the ones that were different. So the difficulty was present, and what is good from this result is that it may imply that we can predict which sounds will be difficult for our learners by comparing the language's phonemic system, right? This also can be associated to the perceptual simulation theories, like the one that I mentioned, the magnet effect. So we can actually make a connection between the categorical perception difficulties and the assimilation theories, because there's not much research regarding these sounds. Then we have the level of learning gain. So in here, we are actually addressing our first research question, which was whether there is an effect or not of the treatment. And the learning gain corresponds to the difference between the immediate the score difference, between the immediate post-test and the pre-test score. So if there was an improvement, and this was within participants, so it means that we just checked that the participants improved, but we were not yet comparing the two groups, the two types of treatment, just the treatment itself. There were significant learning gains only for the experimental category. So as we said, in the pretest, there was no problem with the control categories. With the other sounds, it was practically perfect, the scores, and then we did have a problem. So we did have an improvement in the scores for the target categories. What this can imply is that the audiovisual training of form focus instruction can improve, right? Categorical perception of target contrasts. Now, we also did, as I mentioned, we worked with two groups, right? So the experimental explicit instruction and implicit instruction for the control group. This was the between participants analysis. So when we compare the results from the two groups, even though they both improved, there was not a significant difference between the groups. So we couldn't get a significant difference as to prove one kind of treatment more effective than the other. They were very similar. The average improvement for the implicit instruction was 22%, and for the explicit instruction was 19%. So they seem to be effective, but they seem to be, at least from this experiment, equally effective. And then the second research question was related to the duration of the effect. And this was given by the retention rate, which is the difference between the delayed post-test and the immediate post-test, to see if there was any difference. There was no significant difference between these two scores. So it was very interesting that the categorical perception improvement remained stable after 1 week. However, we need to be very careful with this interpretation because this study was conducted on English-speaking environment, so the exposure that students have may even consolidate what they learned, because they had different opportunities to remember what they were taught. So this might not be applicable to a foreign language context. Now, as a conclusion, this study was mainly exploratory since this was a novel topic and a novel design. There's plenty of research on the case of Japanese learners on categorical perception, but not enough in Spanish. So what this generates is a lot of more questions, if more questions than answers, but it is aimed to bridge the gap between theory and the EFL practice. It is also useful to know that we can, from the theory, anticipate the problems that our students will have. The main finding from this study is that the audiovisual input was effective. This was done audiovisually for like practical matters, But it is very interesting that this was done before the pandemic, and now it is even more relevant because this is a format that we are embracing now in classes. And the fact that no one treatment was more effective than the other is it seems to support the idea of that we need to include like all of the different aspects, all of the different methods, that we can't really go with only one kind of instruction. So sometimes we tend to overlook explicit instruction or lower level processing because we want to make it communicative, but this proved to be effective, and we need to consider a range of techniques when helping our students with these kind of skills, especially listening, which tends to fall in the category of testing more than teaching. Okay, so this is basically the investigation, and thank you for your attention. You can also access the Open Science website by this code. If you scan that, you can access the website of the investigation and actually access the materials, the treatment, and the tests.
Thank you very much, Maria Jose, for your presentation.
Thank you. So I don't know if there are any questions now.
There's a question in the chat box. I don't know if you're able
Sorry,
to.
I don't know why I couldn't see the chat at the beginning. Yeah, I can. I don't know. It disappears, but I can see it in my phone. So let me check. Is it Marco's question?
Yes.
What do you think would happen if a similar production study were conducted? Bearing in mind this is a perception study, would Spanish speakers produce v as well as we perceive them? What impact do you think any potential difference might bring about? So I really like the question because, yes, Marco, thanks for your comment and your question. I like the question because I was thinking also about this. You know, this is my master's dissertation. We only had 3 months. I would have liked to consider production as well, to be honest, but it was not possible. So from the literature, I think that production takes like a different level. I would kind of guess, you know, I haven't researched on this yet, but I would guess that the fact that it was effective to perceive it doesn't really mean that they will produce it after this treatment, of course, right? So I think it is a completely different study to be made, and probably a different kind of treatment, right? When you want students to be able to produce something instead of perceive it. However, this is the first step, right? So that's why we started with perception. From the literature, we can say that it is less likely that students will produce something that they are not aware of, especially when they are adults. We are learning in a more conscious way. And what impact do you think any potential difference might bring about? Impact. I don't really understand what you meant by this question, Marco. I don't know if you can comment on to me on that so we can actually answer it. Do you think this could affect intelligibility? Well, I hope that if this research is conducted, we hope that this can have a positive effect on the learner's ability, right? And so, yes, in terms of production, intelligibility is, I think, the goal. More than, you know, more than a native like accent or pronunciation. We don't need that. what we want is to avoid these crashes that we talked about at the beginning. We want to avoid breakdowns when you start with a mental image and you get to a point when you realize that is not what they meant, right? This is what we want to avoid, either for perception or for production. I don't know if that answers your question, Marco. I have another question here. Thank you, Marco. Were the learners in the study aware of the difference between these two phonemes before the study? So this is a very interesting question. We assessed the difficulty with the pre-test, and from that result, we know that many participants had problems, but there were a few that didn't have the problem, right? So we didn't actually take the participants that didn't present the problem, we didn't take them out of the study. That's actually why we had to work with the medium instead of the mean, because the mean was not representative. There were a few, so I actually suggested in this dissertation that if this study was replicated or we wanted to improve it, we would have to exclude the participants that didn't have this difficulty to make it more representative. And most of the participants were, well, most of them were either Latin American or Spanish, but some of them spoke Catalan. And I was told after the study that in that language, they do have the difference. So I think those were the participants that had kind of a knowledge or an awareness of these phonemes. But from the pretest, we could find that the difficulty was mostly present in the group. However, yeah, we didn't actually take them out. One more question. What type of speakers did you use, and do you think the results would have been different if you have Chilean speakers as input, assuming you used input from native speakers? Yes, so for the tests, it was a native speaker, the one who recorded the words. A man living in York, English, and yeah, no interference there with another language, but the treatment was done by me. Yeah, I was kind of the teacher in the treatment. So we used both things, and I am Chilean, so I think the input was using me. However, the test was using an English speaker. And I think this represents what our students will face. Like, we teach them, but then they go outside and they talk, or they are tested by native speakers. So this is the way we did it. And yeah, by using Chilean speakers for the tests, well, we used it for the input, but if we were using it for the test, we would have to be sure that they are making the difference, you know, because we also do the mistake, or kind of not mistake, confusion when we speak. Unconsciously, again, I think we all do it sometimes. Okay, any other questions? I don't know if Marco, that was clear for you. And if there is any other question. Okay, thank you, Marco. And thank you everyone for your attention. I don't know if there's any other question. I hope this was interesting for you. And again, you can access the treatment, the test, and all of the details in that Open Science code. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose. Very interesting. as it informs our pedagogical practices, right?
Yeah, we hope so.
Absolutely. So we've got, yeah, I think we're right up on time. And I would like to introduce our next presenter. I'm sorry if I make a mistake in terms of pronunciation of Eva Ubajkova. I got some.
That's very close.
Okay, I'm sorry. After obtaining a bachelor's degree in Spanish and English studies, she pursued a master's degree in English linguistics and ELT methodology. Currently, she is a PhD student at the Department of English Language and ELT Methodology at the Faculty of Arts at Charles University in Prague. She is working with her colleagues, I beg your pardon again, Barbara Bulantova and Christoph Betak. I'm sorry, on designing language.
Barbara Bulantova and Christoph Betak.
Okay, thanks so much. On designing language tests for advanced learners. For this project, the team received funding from the START program. Her research interests include teaching English as a foreign language, advanced learners of English, designing language tests, and special educational needs. So I would like to welcome Eva to present designing language tests for advanced learners of English, focus on grammar. Thank you for the correction.
All right, thank you. And thank you for the introduction. Thanks for having me. Okay, can you all see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Not in presentation mode.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you are.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
All right. Hello, everyone, once again. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for having me. So, my name is Eva Ubajkova. I come from Charles University in Prague, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how to design language tests, specifically grammar tests for advanced learners of English. And I'm also going to present some of the results obtained from a pilot study that I was conducting as with the grammar test that I designed as part of my PhD project. So when I'm talking about advanced learners, I have to specify what I mean by that. So in the European context, advanced learners are learners who have attained a level of proficiency of at least C1, according to the Common European Framework of Reference. The C1 level is also known as effective operational proficiency. Now, all the participants in my studies were students of English philology or English language teaching programs, and for these programs, the entry-level requirement is at least B2+, so upper intermediate, between the upper intermediate and effective operational proficiency. But most of the students are already at the C1 level, and those who aren't should reach it in their first year. So, according to the Common European Framework of Reference, the learners who are at the C1 level are characterized by a high degree of grammatical accuracy. But according to some researchers, for example, Graf and Huang, even at such an advanced level, the learners still make not only errors of performance, which is what Charka Balgova in the previous presentation defined as mistakes, so errors due to tiredness or inattention, for example, but they also make errors of competence, which are due to lack of knowledge, and that makes them suitable targets for pedagogical intervention. Now, when we're talking about advanced learners and their knowledge of grammar, there is a large body of research conducted on learner corpora. However, as far as I know, a detailed test assessing the level of grammatical knowledge in advanced learners has not yet been designed. Well, yes, we have the standardized tests, for example, the Cambridge exams, but these tests usually contain 2 to 3 shorter grammar-focused exercises, and these exercises focus on just one of the points, for example, past perfect, and they don't cover a larger part of the spectrum of what advanced learners should know. So that's why I decided to try and create such a test, to create a test targeted specifically at advanced grammar knowledge as part of my PhD project. Now, I was considering different test formats, for example, the standard multiple choice tests or open-closed tests and similar types, but in the end, I decided to go for a grammaticality judgment task. Now, as a principal source, I used a book called Using Judgments in Second Language Acquisition Research by Spinner and Gass. And when I was looking for the structures whose knowledge I was going to be testing, I went to the English Grammar Profile website and I selected originally 8 so-called super categories, but one of the super categories, specifically future perfect, was problematic, and so it was removed after the first pilot stage, which left me with 7 super categories, namely comparison, present simple for used to refer to the future, get passives, pronouns, focus, which also includes cleft sentences, and modality, which I split into 2 subcategories, one of them including verbs dare, need, and ought to, and the other one focusing on certainty, possibility, and the what we call epistemic modality. All right? So in total, the test consists of 8 parts. Each part contains 4 grammatical and 4 ungrammatical sentences. And all the sentences selected for the test were found in online corpora, specifically in Iranian and in the British National Corpus. The final test is a 2-phase online task, and it consists of 2 parts, a judgment part plus a corrections part. Now, in the judgment part, the learners are basically asked to say whether the sentences presented to them are correct or incorrect. There are several different types of response scales that can be used for such a task, and I was considering all of them, but in the end, I decided to go for binary judgments plus a don't know option. Now, the reason I decided to choose binary judgments is that what I'm doing is not an experiment. So I do not need the learners to say whether they find the sentence somewhat acceptable or somewhat unacceptable. Either the sentence is correct or it isn't, okay? So it focuses on knowledge. But even when I thought that the binary judgments might be suitable for what I was doing, I was worried about the reliability because the other methods were said to be more reliable in some books that I was reading. So I did a bit more research, read a couple of studies, which you can see here in the presentation, and I found that the binary judgments are actually just as reliable as the other methods, and they have some other advantages on top of that. One of the advantages being easy scoring, because they are scored in the same manner as most standardized tests. That is 1 point for a correct response and 0 points for everything else. And just very briefly on why I decided to also include the don't know option. So the test focuses on the student's knowledge, right? So they should be able to say that they don't know something, they don't know the answer to something. But in a paper-based test, you can do that quite easily. They just skip what they don't know. In a computer-based test, I had to make all the items compulsory so that, they don't skip the items because they don't want to do them. And so I decided to include this option to at least reduce the guessing rate. In the second part, which is the corrections part, the learners are asked to correct all the sentences that they marked as incorrect in the judgment part. And they don't rewrite whole sentences, but they just rewrite parts, but the corrections have to be clear. And so I provided sample corrections, as you can see here below, in order to increase the, let's say, validity of the test, yeah, and the reliability as well. So the participants are, for example, instructed not to change the main verb. So if they have a sentence such as, yeah, I don't ought to do that, and they correct it as I shouldn't do that, that wouldn't be accepted, because that tells me nothing about whether they know how to use the verb ought to or whether they don't. Yeah, so these corrections can't be accepted. Right. So even the best tests, as I'm sure you know, have some limitations, and my test is no exception. So one of the problems is that it's actually quite time consuming. It takes more than 30 minutes to complete, which is a lot. Also, it requires a lot of concentration on part of the students, because some of the sentences actually need to be read more than once in order to discover the error. And as I said, I try to prevent or at least reduce guessing, but participants who guess in the first part may still receive a slightly higher score than they should receive, because there is the scoring of 1 point per correct response in each part. So in the first part as well as in the second part. And lastly, marking the correction part is slightly problematic, because sometimes it's quite difficult to say what is acceptable and what isn't. So the results I'm going to be presenting here to you are just preliminary, because I will have to ask other raters, including native speakers, to again increase the reliability of the scoring. All right, before we get to the analysis, just what the task looks like. Now, as you can see here, the first part, that's the judgment part. Yeah, so the students have a sentence and they are asked to say whether it's correct, incorrect, or whether they don't know, and then they move on to the next item. Now, once they complete all the items, they move on to this part, which is the corrections part. And here, as I said, they correct all the sentences that they previously, in this part, the first part, marked as incorrect. All right. So let's move on to the analysis and the results from the pilot studies. Now, the first pilot study was conducted with MA students at our university, at Charles University in Prague, and they were all students of English linguistics, but they were only 9 students, which is not a lot, but for the first pilot study, it was enough. And the students were mostly at the highest level, according to the Common European Framework of Reference, so level C2. Now, as for what was most difficult for the students, it was the future perfect, which was at this point still a part of the test. It was removed after the first pilot, and there were items such as he will certainly have been aware that he was taking an enormous risk when he went to Afghanistan, which were problematic because there is, as you can see, modality. The modality is expressed here. And I wasn't able to find sentences which would just allow me to test the knowledge of future perfect. And so I removed this part from the test to increase the validity. And the second part, which was also problematic, was the part focusing on modal verbs dare, need, and ought to. So you can see a sample item here. How dare you be so careless with such an important subject, which is a correct sentence, but some students had the issue that they were trying to like put 2 here. So how dare you to be so careless? Yeah, so they didn't consider it correct without the 2. And on the other hand, the easiest part was the comparison part. So sentences such as the unemployment rate, while not fantastic and not optimal, was not any worse, which is the comparison part, than what we have now in the US. So there were no problems with these types of sentences. Okay, moving on to the second pilot. The second pilot was conducted also with university students, but they were students of bachelor programs usually. Also some MA students, but not as many. They were all students of English philology or English language teaching, and there were 44 of them. So 44 participants, and the levels again, C1 or C2, according to the Common European Framework of Reference. Now, as for the most difficult structure in this part, it was the past perfect, and especially structures containing phrases such as no sooner, than, or hardly, when. Yeah, those types of structures. So, and with this structure, with this example structure that you have here, only 22 out of 44 participants were correct in the judgment part. And then in the corrections part, only 5 participants got it right. So these items were really problematic. As you can see, there is no inversion. Yeah, that's the error. Okay, and in turn, the easiest part were the pronouns. So it was usually substitution by pronouns, and there were no problems with that, basically. So items like they had no proof that their version was right and ours was wrong instead of our version. So that's what I mean by substitution by pronouns. All right. Okay, so after the second pilot, after this stage, I conducted a validity analysis. I did some statistical tests such as factor analysis and basic item difficulty, and I replaced the problematic items, which allow me to come up with the final version, which was presented at students at our department again. There were 67 participants, and they were all BA students in the first year of English philology or English language teaching at the Faculty of Arts. Yeah, and the testing, as all the other previous studies, took place online. They had the Lime survey platform. Okay, moving on to the results. Now, as you can see, the hardest part was again the past perfect, which only on average 35% of students, well, on average only 35% of the students got the items right. On the other hand, the easiest part was comparison, where on average 78% of the students got the items right. Okay, if I compare the 2 parts, the judgment part and the corrections part, we can again see that in both parts, past perfect, yeah, was the most difficult one. The corrections were especially problematic because the students didn't know that the problem was the inversion, so they tried to correct something else in the sentences, and I will show you in a minute what it was. And as for the easiest part, again, comparison in the judgment part, but in the corrections part, interestingly, it wasn't comparison, it was focus, which includes, as I said, the cleft sentences. So usually WH clefts or it clefts, right? Okay, and now I'm also comparing the judgment part and the corrections part, but this time I'm including only attempted corrections. So this is the results for only the students who were right in the judgment part. Yeah. And as you can see, the easiest part was the using present simple to refer to the future, and 90% of the students on average were right in the corrections. The hardest part, again, the most difficult part, the past perfect. So let's move on to what was problematic about it. There were 3 items which were particularly difficult for the students, and as I said, all containing the structures such as hardly, when, no sooner than, if only. Yeah, those were the structures where I suspect the students don't really have the knowledge. Yeah. Okay, so what was the problem with this item? Item 4 was correct, as you can see, but 30 out of 67 participants marked it as incorrect. So that was the problem. They thought that the correct version was actually without the inversion, so hardly the troops had departed when new disorders broke out. That's what they considered correct, and they specified it in the corrections part. As for the incorrect item, item 5, they considered it correct again without the inversion, or they tried to change then for that. So that was one of the problems. And with the last item, that was the opposite problem, because that actually isn't supposed to be inversion. Yeah, it's supposed to be if only it had been explained this way, but most students actually considered it correct the way it is here. So what follows from the analysis? First of all, it looks like there is still room for improvement when it comes to grammar. Second, if the participants identify the error, if they know there is an error, they usually know how to correct it. It looks like they have no problem using the present simple to refer to the future. So to give you an example, sentences such as, he'll be the only superstar athlete to have a best-selling biography by the time he's 29. Yeah, so this part of the sentence was what we were focusing on, and there were no problems with that. But what they are struggling with is the past perfect. And as I said, mostly structures such as no sooner than, hardly, when, or if only. They appear, on the other hand, to know the third conditional. So sentences such as, the public would have been less impressed had it known the facts, or if it had known the facts. No problems there. Yeah? And what you have here is actually an incorrect sentence. So they were supposed to correct it and they did it right. Okay, so that's all from me. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. The room is open for the audience to ask questions. Professor Balgova.
Me again. Because it's very interesting that this kind of data, it's very important for me. So I'm going to start from the ending when you showed the inversion. I'm just going to comment quickly. We talked about this with Ivka before, yes, because we are friends and ex-classmates. I actually, and me and Professor Carmen Gloria, we included inversion in the syllabus, and we started teaching that last year, and it's also part of the new manual, which is going to be published soon, hopefully 17th. So be ready for that. I'm going to share this with you, because there is inversion as well. And I noticed what basically it just confirms what you are saying. When I showed this the inversion for the first time, the students were very overwhelmed. They didn't, they didn't believe me that this was correct. And it was good because we discussed it in classes and I told them, yes, this is correct. And that was very, very nice. And I think we all should do that. I mean, at this level, obviously, I wouldn't discuss it.
Those students as well,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. If you teach a level B1, obviously not. But if you do have students who are supposed to be between B2 and C1, then you have to.
Yeah, that's why the English grammar profile is there to help you decide what to teach and what to include when you teach learners at a specific level. I will share it. I will send you a link in case you don't know what I'm talking about.
And the past perfect is interesting. It's almost always the past perfect. Do you think that it is because we don't use it so much when we are speaking that we just simply forget?
I think that yeah, you're not using it. It's not, part of most conversations. So you know it when you read studies like, research, or when you read some of the more complicated books, but you don't usually see it, you don't hear it on TV that much. So that would be the reason probably.
And I think you might have mentioned it, so I'm sorry if I'm going to repeat this. You have selected the test when basically there are two parts. Wouldn't it be better to have the correction straight after each sentence? I know that you did selected it for a reason, but I don't remember the reason why. Because I also took the test, so one of the
yeah. I did it mainly because I didn't want the students to know that they made the mistake right away. So that was one of the reasons. And I heard in the literature, in the books, it was recommended. They said that it was better to actually include the corrections part after all the judgments were made. Because, if you have one sentence examining the same structure, let's say you have past perfect sentence and two third conditionals, and then you click on one, mark it correct, and then mark it as incorrect, and then no correction basically pops up. So if you know what I mean.
I would like to try this one more time, maybe with the shorter test, but I like it very much.
Yeah.
Because it's different from...
as I said, I try to include a larger spectrum of the structures, but I realized that it's long. It's really long. Like 64 sentences, and then you have to correct 32 of them if you get it all right. So that's a lot.
That's what I was going, and this is going to my last comment or question, or just you take it from there. Couldn't the test be maybe divided into two different parts with the break, or I don't know, because I struggled. I can pay attention. So I can pay attention for 30, 40 minutes or 60 minutes if I, focus on something. But myself, myself as a student, I struggled with that. So that is the only limitation I think you have to consider, and maybe see if it couldn't be like a part A and part B, or I don't know, taking them separately maybe.
Thank you. That's a good point. I will consider that, definitely. But the students can take a break between the corrections part and the judgment part. There were actually problems with that when I first started using the test, so in the first and second pilot stage, because I had the server programmed to basically stop. So the session expired after a certain time. And so I had to reprogram that to actually allow the learners to take a break. So now it's like 10 hours, and I hope that nothing happens, no accidents if someone decides to take a 10-minute break in between.
Okay.
Maybe I should tell the learners explicitly, you can take a break if you like.
You should, because that's going to be the only limitation which could kind of cause some troubles. Okay, thank you very much. I think there is somebody else. I'm going to stop talking.
Yes.
There's another question. Yes, Sarah.
I'm trying to turn my camera on. Hi.
Hello.
It's very hard to find material or research for learners who have a B2 or C1 level. Usually you have a lot for A1, A2, etc., but you don't have for. I just have a question. I don't know if you might have some explanation regarding this. My students are usually B1, B2, and then sometimes C1. And I have noticed that they tend to start making mistakes again when they reach a B2 plus or C1 level. Like, for example, comparison. They master it, it's perfect. And then when they reach the C1, they don't know if it's worse or worst or betterer or worser, and they start making mistakes again for like all the categories you mentioned. They start making mistakes again, and I'm very surprised because it's surprising. I don't know why they start making mistakes again for things that they have mastered previously.
Yeah, I can only guess, but I do have a guess. Because, you know, when they're learning the structures that are more complicated, such as it wasn't any worse than something, it's not like worse, you know, they know the triad, they know like bad, worse, worst, they know that, yeah? But when they start learning those structures as phrases, all of a sudden they're not sure, is it worse, is it worst? And so they start making these types of mistakes. I'm not sure if that answers your questions. Of course, they might not revise some structures enough, so they forget them altogether. But usually I think it's that.
That might explain it. I noticed it for all of my students. So I was just very surprised to why they would start again making mistakes and the same mistakes. But thank you for your answer.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. Anyone else? Okay, if not, thanks very much for having me. Thanks for the opportunity, and it was lovely being here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. Evelyn, can we come back for a quick picture?
Absolutely. Turn on your cameras, please, all the attendees, participants.
All beautiful. Lovely smiles.
Is it going to be like 1, 2, and then you take the picture?
I will say that. I was just
Okay.
waiting for everybody to switch on the camera. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Super. I'm going to send it so that you see it, but you are all beautiful, I'm sure. I think it's all perfect. Okay, super. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharka, for always the perfect picture at the right moment.
We don't hear you.
Thank you so much again. So we're finishing the morning session. I was saying that we are meeting again at 2:30. Professor Diaz will share a link in the chat box for you to share some feedback about the research day, about this activity. We want to hear from you, from your comments, and to make it better next time. There's always room for improvement, right? So we're going to stop now. We're going to have lunch. Not together, but we're going to have lunch, and we'll meet again at 2:30. Thank you very much for your participation today. See you in the afternoon.
Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.